I found a village on no map, and the residents didn't exist yesterday. I didn't even know how to explain it to myself, not fully. One moment I was driving along a narrow country road, lost somewhere between the mountains and the endless forest, GPS flickering like it was trying to warn me. The sun had dipped low, a bruised orange hue bleeding into the horizon, and I was desperate to find a place to rest. That's when I saw it, a cluster of cottages tucked into a small clearing, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. It was perfectly quaint, almost storybook in its calmness. But there had been no sign of it on my maps, no road leading to it, nothing. Yet the dirt path in front of me was clearly traveled, lined with wheel ruts and worn patches of grass, as though the village had been waiting. As I drove closer, a chill crawled up my spine. There was no wind, yet the smoke seemed to drift in impossible directions, as if testing the air. The cottages were too perfect, almost staged, and the few villagers I glimpsed moving about seemed to belong to a different era entirely. I parked at the edge of the clearing and stepped out, my boots crunching against gravel that seemed too fine for the road. A bell tolled somewhere, though I couldn't see a bell tower, and I felt a shiver ripple across my back. The first person I saw was an old man sweeping leaves from the doorstep of a small, stone house. He glanced at me, eyes sharp and calculating, and nodded in a way that made my stomach twist. "Hello?" I called, though my voice sounded far too loud in the oppressive silence. The man straightened, paused mid-sweep, then muttered something under his breath. It wasn't any language I recognized, though it had a rhythm that made my hair stand on end. Before I could respond, he shuffled inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. I stepped closer, curiosity outweighing fear, peering through the dusty window. Inside, the room was lit by a fire, yet no one was there. Chairs sat neatly around the table, cups perched perfectly on their saucers. It was as though he'd vanished mid-action. I wandered further into the village. The streets were narrow, winding almost unnaturally between the houses. Every door I approached was locked, or empty inside. And yet, I could hear footsteps, soft at first, echoing behind me, though no one was there when I turned. The villagers I did see seemed frozen in odd routines, a woman hanging laundry that moved as if brushed by invisible hands, a child sitting on a swing that rocked in still air. When I tried to speak to them, their heads would twitch ever so slightly toward me, but no words came, only an unnerving silence that pressed against my ears. Then I reached the square. A fountain sat in the center, water trickling quietly, though the pond beneath it shimmered strangely, reflecting not the cottages around it but a dense, gray fog I couldn't see anywhere else. And around the square, the villagers had begun to gather. They didn't walk, they seemed to glide slightly above the ground, moving with an unnatural synchronicity. My heart raced as I realized that their faces were wrong. Too smooth, too pale, their eyes lacking depth, yet when they turned toward me, I felt as though every secret I'd ever held was visible in their gaze. I don't belong here, I said aloud, more to steady myself than to communicate. The words carried oddly, almost bouncing off invisible walls, as though the village itself was listening. One of the villagers, a young man with hollow eyes, stepped forward. His mouth opened, and though no sound emerged, I understood his intent clearly. They knew I didn't belong, and they had been expecting me. Panic surged. I backed away, tripping over the uneven stones of the square, but when I looked again, the fountain's water had gone completely still, black like ink, reflecting the gathering villagers in grotesque clarity. Suddenly, the village shifted. Houses twisted subtly, windows tilting at impossible angles, chimneys stretching like spires into the fading light. The path I had driven on disappeared entirely, replaced by a wall of dense fog creeping inward. I realized with a sinking horror that leaving might not be as simple as retracing my steps. And then I noticed the faint outlines of people appearing in the mist at the edge of the village, watching me, moving closer with silent intent. My stomach dropped. This was no ordinary village. It never was. I ran toward the edge of the square, toward the faint remnants of the road I thought I'd come from, but the villagers, now dozens, glided in synchronized silence around me, forming a wall of pale, expressionless faces. My panic heightened when I noticed the shadows beneath them did not match their bodies. They stretched long and thin, moving independently, writhing across the cobblestones as if alive. The sensation was suffocating, as though the village itself was breathing, observing, and deciding my fate. I stumbled back toward the fountain, and as my hand touched the cold stone, the water rippled violently. For a moment, I saw not my reflection but fleeting images, myself, older, wandering the same streets, lost and silent, the cottages emptying of life but filled with shadows, the fog rolling over the village like a predator. I yanked my hand away. When I looked again, the vision had vanished, and the villagers had halted their approach, tilting their heads in unison as if listening to some unspoken command. Then came the sound, a low, humming vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The villagers' faces contorted subtly, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. I could feel it in my bones. This village had rules I did not understand, a rhythm of life and death, appearing and vanishing at will. And somehow, I had triggered its attention. The mist thickened, curling around my legs, tugging at me with a cold persistence. The path home had disappeared entirely. I swallowed hard, turning to run deeper into the twisting streets, desperately searching for anything familiar, anything that could help me escape. But each street looped back impossibly to the same square, the fountain staring at me like a dark eye. And somewhere, deep in the fog, a whisper echoed, "You weren't meant to see us, yet here you are." I froze. The voice was neither male nor female. It carried the weight of centuries, of lives swallowed whole. And in that instant, I knew this village wasn't just hidden, it was alive, and I was now part of its ever-growing story. The traveler discovers that the village is sentient, appearing and vanishing at will. The villagers are no longer human, and the paths out of the village have disappeared. A mysterious, omniscient voice warns him that he wasn't meant to see the village, but now he's trapped. I pressed myself against the cold stone of the fountain, trying to slow the panic clawing at my chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but the streets had shifted again. Narrow alleys I thought I'd just passed now looped impossibly back into the square. The villagers' movements were hypnotic, synchronized like a deadly dance I couldn't escape. I glanced down at the fountain's still black water, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw shadows swimming beneath the surface, humanoid shapes reaching toward me. I jerked back, my heart hammering, and a chill ran up my spine. Whatever this village was, it didn't just observe. It consumed. I forced myself to move, inching along one of the twisting streets, hoping to find a doorway or some sign of normalcy. But the cottages seemed to stretch endlessly, their walls tilting and shifting as if alive. Windows stared like hollow eyes, reflecting my terror back at me, and doors that had been closed swung open silently, revealing empty rooms with furniture arranged in meticulous, unnatural order. I realized with a sinking dread that the village wasn't just hiding something, it was a trap, a living labyrinth designed to disorient, to make me lose sense of time, space, and reality itself. I ducked into one of the larger cottages, hoping for a moment of reprieve. Inside, the air was thick, the smell of damp wood and faint smoke choking. The furniture was covered in white sheets, but as I stepped closer, the shapes under the cloths moved subtly. I froze. A chair slowly lowered itself to the floor, a tablecloth fluttered as if brushed by invisible hands, and a soft thud echoed above me. I climbed the narrow staircase cautiously, each step creaking like a warning. At the top, a long corridor stretched away, lined with doors. Behind one, I thought I heard whispering, soft, rhythmic, chanting almost, though no words were clear. I opened the nearest door. The room appeared normal at first, a bedroom with a small bed and a dresser. But then I noticed something strange. In the mirror above the dresser, the reflection didn't show me. It showed a figure standing behind me, tall, indistinct, its face a blurred smear of shadows. I spun around, but the room was empty. A cold wind brushed my neck, and the mirror rippled like liquid. The figure in the reflection leaned closer, and in a voice that seemed to echo inside my skull, it whispered, "You cannot leave, not yet." I bolted from the room, down the staircase, and out into the street, desperate for any exit. The villagers had returned, gliding silently across the square. Their pale faces were expressionless, yet I felt their awareness piercing through me, reading my fear. I ducked behind a cart stacked with firewood, trying to catch my breath. The fog was thicker now, curling around my legs, rising like a living thing, suffocating and cold. And then I noticed it, in the mist, faint outlines of other travelers, people who hadn't been there moments ago, standing motionless, their eyes vacant, their lips moving soundlessly. They weren't alive, not really. I realized with horror that they had been absorbed into the village, trapped forever, their consciousness lingering like shadows. Panic turned to determination. I had to understand the rules of this place if I was going to survive. I edged closer to the center of the square, toward the fountain, and studied the villagers' movements. There was a rhythm, a pattern, subtle but undeniable. They moved in waves, following an unseen pulse. My mind raced. If I could time my movements with their rhythm, perhaps I could slip past unnoticed. I waited, counting heartbeats against the faint hum in the air, and when the moment came, I darted across the square, ducking behind shadowed alcoves and carts. But just as I reached the opposite side, the fountain erupted in a column of black water, the villagers freezing mid-step, their eyes suddenly bright and unblinking. I ran blindly down one of the twisting streets, the fog thickening with each step. Every corner I turned led me back to the square, the fountain, and the villagers. My mind began to falter, the looping streets bending reality. Time no longer felt linear, the sun dipped and rose in impossible sequences, shadows stretching and shrinking unnaturally. I began to hear whispers everywhere, soft, melodic, yet terrifying. They spoke of things I couldn't comprehend, lives I hadn't lived, names I didn't know, and a warning repeated in a dozen languages, all echoing in my skull. The village remembers. You belong. Exhausted and terrified, I stumbled into another alleyway and collapsed against the wall. My hands shook, my breath came in ragged gasps, and for the first time, I truly feared I would never escape. Then I noticed a small doorway, partially hidden by ivy and shadows, that I hadn't seen before. A dim light glowed from within, warm and inviting, unlike the cold white of the villager's gaze. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I moved toward it. As I reached for the handle, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. From below, a faint, eerie melody floated up, beckoning me. I hesitated, my mind screaming that this could be a trap, but a part of me needed answers. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a heavy thud. The darkness swallowed me immediately, but the faint glow from the walls illuminated carved symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and I felt the walls subtly shifting, as if alive. The melody grew louder, harmonizing with the hum I had felt in the streets above. Then I saw them, faint silhouettes moving in the dark, circling endlessly, their faces obscured. They weren't villagers, they were something older, something that predated the village itself. And then the whisper came again, clear and unmistakable, "You cannot leave, not until you understand why we exist." The protagonist discovers that the village operates with a mysterious rhythm and traps the consciousness of those who enter. In descending through a hidden doorway, he finds himself in a dark, pulsing underworld beneath the village, surrounded by ancient, shadowy figures. The village speaks directly to him, promising that he cannot leave until he uncovers its secrets. The spiral staircase seemed endless, each step reverberating as if the stone itself were alive, echoing my fear back to me. The walls glowed faintly with an otherworldly light, revealing patterns that writhed and shifted, almost as if they were breathing. My pulse thundered in my ears, and the melody I had heard from above now enveloped me completely, soft, hypnotic, and undeniably human in its cadence, yet twisted, almost wrong. The whispers returned, now in layers, overlapping and merging, carrying fragments of words I understood: memory, surrender, we remember. I realized with growing horror that the village was not merely a place, it was a collector of lives, a keeper of souls, and it had been watching me long before I saw it. At the base of the staircase, the floor opened into a cavernous hall, dimly illuminated by phosphorescent fungi crawling along the walls. Shadows shifted across the floor as if crawling independently of the faint glow. Figures emerged from the darkness, tall, indistinct, faces blurred, their forms stretching and contracting unnaturally. They moved in silent procession, circling an enormous pool of black water that mirrored the twisted ceiling above. The melody intensified, rising in harmony with my heartbeat, and suddenly I realized that the pool reflected not the cavern, but fragments of my own life, places I had been, people I had known, moments I had forgotten. I stumbled backward, and the figures turned in unison, their blank gazes seeming to pierce through me, weighing my very existence. I had to know what this place was. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but escape seemed impossible. I edged closer to the pool, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. As I peered into the water, faces appeared, my own, older, younger, distorted by fear, sadness, and horror. And then the reflection spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in an overwhelming presence that filled my mind. You see us, you see the village, but you cannot leave until you understand. My stomach churned. I realized that understanding was a trap, that knowledge itself could bind me, that every answer came at the cost of my freedom. Suddenly, movement in the shadows caught my eye. A figure stepped forward, human in shape but impossibly elongated, the edges of its body dissolving into mist. Its voice, when it spoke, was melodic yet chilling. Long ago, we were like you. Curious, wandering, seeking, until we learned the rhythm. Now, we are bound, and so are those who follow. The village is alive. It feeds on what you call memory, weaving your experiences into its structure, its life, its will. I stumbled back, tripping over jagged stone, and realized that the floor beneath me wasn't stone at all. It shifted, undulating like flesh. The walls pulsed in time with the melody, and the figures advanced, encircling me slowly, deliberately, their movement hypnotic. Panic surged. I tried to run toward the staircase, but the steps I had descended had vanished, replaced by a smooth surface that reflected my terror back at me. I was trapped in this subterranean heart of the village, and every instinct screamed that the villagers above were aware of my location, controlling, guiding, and waiting. The whispers swirled around me, fragments of lost travelers' voices echoing, "Do not resist, you will be absorbed, we remember you." My mind screamed in confusion, yet another part of me, the part still clinging to reason, wondered how I had stumbled into this nightmare and whether anyone had ever returned from it. As I scanned the cavern, I noticed a doorway, half hidden behind one of the towering shadow figures. Unlike the other walls, it was tangible, carved from a strange, dark wood that seemed impervious to the pulsating light. Faint carvings lined its frame, symbols I could not comprehend but felt inherently wrong, ancient and aware. A shiver ran down my spine as I approached, and for a fleeting moment, I heard the faintest sound of laughter, not joyful, but cold and hollow, like wind through a tomb. I knew that opening the door might be the only way to discover the truth, but also that it could seal my fate forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grasped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a long corridor lined with small, flickering lanterns that cast more shadows than light. Along the walls, I saw fragments of memories, images of the villagers in life, ordinary people frozen mid-action, as though the village had plucked them from reality. I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that the village's hunger was not merely physical, it was temporal, devouring lives and weaving them into its own existence. The figures in the cavern whispered in unison, "Understand, or be lost forever." I stepped into the corridor, and the door slammed behind me with a deafening boom. Darkness pressed in from all sides, and the flickering lanterns revealed glimpses of my own face among the captured memories on the walls. My pulse quickened as I realized the corridor twisted impossibly with every step, and the whispers grew louder, now layered with fear, despair, and anger. A sudden cold swept over me, and I felt hands, cold, insubstantial, brush against my shoulders, guiding me forward. Somewhere ahead, I could hear faint, echoing laughter, and I understood in a terrifying instant that the village's consciousness was aware of every thought, every heartbeat, every hesitation. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the village itself moving above me, the streets folding and twisting as if alive, the fountain in the square rippling violently. The villagers' footsteps echoed through the ground, a rhythm that matched the pulsing lights around me, and a whisper in my mind finally articulated what I had been fearing: "You are ours now, but first, you must learn why." The protagonist descends into the village's subterranean heart, discovering that it feeds on memory and life, weaving people's existence into its own. Ancient shadow figures encircle him, guiding and manipulating him. A mysterious corridor reveals the trapped memories of past victims, and the village itself seems aware of every action. The whispers warn him that he is now part of the village, endlessly before me, but he must first understand lanterns casting shadows that seemed to shift independently of the light. Each step I took echoed in impossible ways, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, as though the corridor itself were mocking my movement. Along the walls, the fragments of memories writhed and flickered like living tapestries. Faces stared from the warped reflections, people I didn't recognize, yet each one radiated fear so intense that it felt contagious. I pressed my hands against the walls, feeling the vibrations beneath the surface, faint murmurs of lives consumed. The realization settled in my chest like a stone: these weren't merely illusions. They were trapped souls, woven into the very substance of the village. A sudden movement caught my eye. One of the faces, an old woman holding a lantern, shifted, her eyes meeting mine. For a heartbeat, she seemed to plead, mouthing words I could not hear. Then the image shimmered and twisted into a grotesque mask before fading entirely. I staggered back, my mind struggling to process what I had just witnessed. The whispers intensified, layering in dozens of languages, some ancient, some eerily familiar, all repeating one phrase: "You will remember, or you will become part of us." As I moved further down the corridor, I noticed symbols etched into the floor in a pattern I could not comprehend. The symbols pulsed faintly, vibrating beneath my feet like the pulse of a heartbeat. Each step I took seemed to resonate with them, and I realized that the corridor itself was alive, reacting to my presence. The shadows along the walls stretched toward me, then recoiled as though testing my resolve. My pulse quickened, and I whispered to myself, "I have to understand. I have to survive." At a junction, the corridor split into 3 passages. The lanterns flickered erratically, casting long, wavering shadows. I hesitated, sensing that each path would lead to different truths, or different deaths. One passage was lined with mirrors, reflecting distorted versions of myself, each one older, twisted, or missing features. The second led downward into a darkness so thick I could barely see my own hands. The third glowed faintly, warm yet unnatural, as if inviting me forward. I took a shaky breath and chose the glowing path, reasoning that understanding must lie where the village's own light beckoned. The passage opened into a large chamber, circular and impossibly tall. The walls were covered in more symbols, some glowing faintly, others etched in deep relief. In the center of the room, suspended above the ground, was a massive orb of black water, the same dark liquid I had seen in the cavern below. Faces swam just beneath its surface, their eyes wide with fear and sorrow. I realized with horror that these were the earliest victims, perhaps even the village's original inhabitants, forever trapped in a looping nightmare. The whispers coalesced into words I could finally understand: "They built us, and now we endure." A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, its edges blurring into mist. Unlike the villagers I had seen, this entity radiated authority. Its voice resonated in my mind, calm yet commanding: "You seek answers, but answers are not free. The village remembers all who enter. Each memory, each thought, each hesitation becomes part of its fabric. To leave, you must understand the balance. To survive, you must contribute. My stomach churned. Contribute? I realized that the village didn't merely trap people, it needed something from them, and I had just stepped into its demand. I tried to retreat, but the floor beneath me shifted, guiding me inexorably toward the orb. Faces beneath the water pressed against the surface, their mouths opening in silent screams, eyes wide with pleading. A chill ran through me, and I realized with growing dread that the villagers above, the shadows in the corridors, and the trapped souls were all part of the same consciousness, a hive mind that stretched through time, consuming experiences and lives to sustain itself. And then the first direct contact came. A hand, insubstantial yet cold as ice, reached up from the orb, grasping my ankle. I screamed, wrenching free, but another followed, tugging at my sleeve. The shadows in the room flickered and danced with a life of their own, forming shapes I couldn't name, faces I couldn't bear to see. The entity's voice echoed again, "Do not resist what you cannot yet understand. You are already part of us, but the final choice is yours." I backed away, heart pounding, scanning the chamber for an exit, but the walls seemed to stretch and twist impossibly, reshaping themselves with each blink. And then I noticed it, another doorway, smaller, almost hidden behind a cluster of symbols glowing faintly. A warmth emanated from it, unlike the cold, suffocating presence of the orb. Could this be a way out? Or another trap? The whispers surged into a deafening chorus, repeating, "Understand, or join, understand, or join." My hands trembled as I reached for the doorway, knowing that stepping through it might mean salvation, or my eternal binding to the village. With a trembling breath, I pushed the door open, and was met with darkness deeper than any night, silent except for the faint, rhythmic pulse I now realized was the heartbeat of the village itself. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The darkness pressed in, alive and aware, as a single thought reverberated through my mind: "Welcome to the true heart of the village, your story begins here." The protagonist discovers the chamber at the village's heart, dominated by the black orb containing trapped souls. An authoritative shadow entity explains the village consumes memories and life to sustain itself. The first physical contact occurs, and the protagonist is confronted with a choice: understand and risk being consumed, or refuse and face immediate absorption. A hidden doorway offers possible escape, but stepping through could seal his fate. I swallowed hard and stepped through the hidden doorway, and the darkness closed behind me with a finality that made my chest tighten. The air was damp and heavy, filled with a scent I could not place, something between earth, decay, and a faint metallic tang. The faint glow that had beckoned me illuminated a narrow passage carved directly from the rock beneath the village. The walls pulsed ever so slightly, echoing the rhythm of the orb above, as if the village itself were aware of my intrusion. My footsteps echoed hollowly, yet the sound seemed to precede me, bouncing in ways that defied physics. Every instinct screamed that this place was alive, that every stone and shadow observed me, calculating, judging, waiting. The passage opened into a larger chamber, irregular in shape, with walls covered in intricate carvings. At first, I couldn't make sense of them, they appeared abstract, twisted into spirals and jagged lines. But as I stepped closer, the images began to resolve. Faces of past victims emerged, etched into the walls, their expressions frozen in terror and despair. I reached out, fingertips brushing against the stone, and felt a jolt of icy energy surge through me. The whispers returned, louder now, weaving together a coherent narrative. They spoke of a village older than memory, of people drawn to it through curiosity or misfortune, all absorbed into its eternal pattern. Each wall, each street, each whispering villager was a fragment of countless lives, stitched into the fabric of the village itself. I stumbled backward, disoriented. The ceiling above me seemed to stretch impossibly high, yet glimpses of light filtered from cracks far above, revealing glimpses of the village's square. I realized then that I was beneath it, directly at the village's core, where its power converged. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through my bones, matching the pulse I had felt since descending the spiral staircase. Then I saw them, figures moving at the edges of my vision, flickering in and out of existence. Some were vaguely human, others more monstrous, their forms constantly shifting. Each one carried the faint imprint of a life once lived, their eyes reflecting the memories I had glimpsed in the orb above. I pressed on, trying to make sense of what I had discovered. The walls were covered not just in faces, but in carvings that resembled maps, pathways, and diagrams, twisting streets, looping corridors, and impossible architecture that mirrored the village above. I realized the village's streets, its alleys, the fountain, even the cottages were extensions of this underground heart, physical manifestations of its consciousness. The villagers weren't simply controlling the town, they were conduits, puppets of something far older, far more intelligent, and far more terrifying than I had imagined. A soft, almost imperceptible glow appeared at the far end of the chamber. Drawn to it, I moved cautiously, every instinct screaming that the glow could be either salvation or a trap. As I approached, the air shifted, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, clearer than any before. Do you understand yet? All who enter are pieces of the village, and all who resist are absorbed. To leave, you must choose willingly, or become part of eternity. My mind reeled. The village was alive, yes, but it thrived on choice, on the fear, curiosity, and desperation of those trapped within it. I understood then that escape was not about fleeing, but about navigating its rules, its consciousness, and its intricate web of memory. The glow resolved into a shallow pool of liquid, eerily similar to the black water of the orb above. Its surface shimmered, reflecting not just my face, but scenes from my life, some I remembered, others I had long forgotten. Each image pulsed in rhythm with the whispers, and I felt a tug, a pull as though the village itself reached into my mind, drawing threads of memory into its growing fabric. I staggered back, trembling, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to resist, yet part of me understood that surrendering fragments of myself might be the only way to navigate this labyrinth. Then movement at the edges of the chamber caught my attention. A shadow, taller and more distinct than the others, approached. Its form shimmered between human and something else entirely, tendrils of darkness extending from its body. Unlike the previous figures, this one radiated intelligence, authority. Its voice resonated in my skull, soft yet commanding. The village did not create itself. We were drawn here, bound by choice and curiosity. Those who come after, like you, must either accept the rhythm, or join the tapestry. I felt my resolve waver. To accept would mean surrendering part of my identity to the village, to resist could mean annihilation. Desperation overtook reason. I looked around, seeking an exit, and noticed a narrow passage branching off from the chamber, partially hidden by shadows. Unlike the main corridor, it seemed uncarved, raw and natural, as if the village had not yet claimed it. A flicker of hope surged through me. Perhaps this was a way out, an unclaimed path that bypassed the village's central consciousness. But as I stepped toward it, the glow from the pool behind me flared violently, casting long, writhing shadows across the walls. Whispers turned into a roar, a cacophony of voices pressing into my mind. Do not leave, you are ours, choose, or be absorbed. My pulse raced as I dashed toward the passage, heart pounding in rhythm with the village itself. The walls seemed to bend around me, the shadows stretching toward my feet, clawing at my heels. And then, as I reached the entrance, I felt a cold, intangible hand brush my shoulder, halting me mid-step. A voice, low and resonant, whispered in my mind, "You cannot escape, not until you understand who we are, and why you came." I froze, trapped between flight and fear, realizing that the village's true secret was still beyond my grasp. The whispers pressed closer, the shadows tightened, and the pulsating walls seemed to close in. One choice remained: move forward into the unknown passage and risk complete absorption, or remain and confront the village's central consciousness directly, with no guarantee of survival. The protagonist discovers the village's core consciousness and its power to absorb memories and identity. A narrow, seemingly unclaimed passage offers a possible escape, but the village reaches for him, its whispers demanding understanding. He faces an impossible choice: risk stepping into the unknown, or confront the village directly, knowing either option may mean death or eternal entrapment. I swallowed hard, heart pounding like a drum in my chest, and forced my legs forward into the narrow passage. The shadows seemed to recoil slightly as I moved, as if the village were testing my resolve. The air grew colder and heavier, thick with the scent of damp stone and something darker, decay mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood. The walls were rough and uneven, carved by no human hand, yet they pulsated faintly, echoing the rhythmic heartbeat I had felt since first descending into the village's underworld. Every step seemed to reverberate against the stones, and I could hear whispers now trailing me like invisible companions, repeating fragmented words I couldn't yet understand. The passage narrowed further, forcing me to move single file through the darkness. I ran my hands along the walls, and the rough texture felt almost organic, like skin stretched tight over something massive and unseen. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and merging into an eerie chant: "We remember, we consume, we wait." My stomach churned. I realized with dawning horror that the village didn't just trap memories, it fed on the emotional residue of fear, curiosity, and desperation, using it to animate itself. Every pulse of its unseen heartbeat made the walls quiver, reminding me that I was no longer in control. I was part of its rhythm, a reluctant participant in its eternal cycle. After what felt like hours, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber. My eyes strained to take in the space, lit dimly by faint bioluminescent moss clinging to jagged walls. The floor was uneven, slick with damp, and the air felt alive, vibrating with an energy I could feel deep in my bones. Shadows moved along the walls, forming grotesque shapes, some humanoid, some utterly alien, flickering in and out of existence. And then I saw them, figures encased in crystalline structures, frozen mid-motion, their expressions captured in eternal terror. I recognized the same emptiness I had seen in the orb above, the same fate awaiting anyone who became fully absorbed by the village. I approached cautiously, and the whispers coalesced into a single voice, resonating in my mind with uncanny clarity: each who enters adds to the tapestry. Each who resists strengthens the weave. Yet those who understand may yet leave, if they survive the trial. I shuddered, realizing the village's rules were more than physical, they were tests of will, perception, and comprehension. To leave, I would have to navigate not just its corridors, but its consciousness, threading carefully through the layers of memory and manipulation it had constructed. Every wrong step risked my mind, my soul, my very existence. From the far side of the chamber, I noticed a faint glow emanating from a doorway partially hidden by jagged stone. As I approached, the air grew warmer, tinged with an almost hypnotic fragrance that made my head swim. A melody drifted from within, a haunting tune that felt both familiar and wrong. I stepped closer, my curiosity fighting the fear that screamed at me to turn back. Just as my hand brushed the edge of the doorway, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, its body shifting between solid and vaporous, edges dissolving like smoke in water. Its eyes, impossibly bright, bore into mine, and I felt every secret I had ever kept laid bare under its gaze. "You seek escape," it said, voice echoing in my mind. But escape is not given freely. The village tests, the village demands, and the village remembers. To leave, you must first confront what you fear most. Only then will the path be revealed. My knees buckled. I understood the implication: this was no mere labyrinth of stone and fog, but a trial of the self. The village would exploit my deepest fears, twisting them into reality until I either succumbed or overcame. My mind raced as memories surfaced unbidden: mistakes, regrets, lost friends, and moments of cowardice. The village intended to use them all against me. I took a trembling step forward, and the doorway dissolved into mist. I was no longer in the chamber, but in a space that seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. The walls had vanished, shadows hung in the void like smoke, and the floor beneath me was a mirror reflecting countless versions of myself. Each reflection moved independently, some pointing, some screaming, some smiling with faces I recognized from my past. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus. I had to find the core truth, the rule the village lived by, if I wanted to survive. From the void, a whisper slithered into my mind, face them, face yourself, or remain part of the weave forever. I realized, with a chilling clarity, that this was the first direct confrontation with the village's essence. It wasn't just the walls, the streets, or the villagers, it was a conscious, sentient force, and it was testing me, probing my mind, tugging at the deepest corners of my fear and memory. I had a choice: surrender to its power and be absorbed, or confront the versions of myself that I had tried to hide and failed to acknowledge. I clenched my fists and stepped forward, facing the nearest reflection. It grinned at me, eyes black voids of judgment. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to speak, "I will not become part of you." The reflection laughed, a sound that echoed endlessly, but I felt a ripple of the village's pulse respond. The others stirred, reacting to my defiance. I realized that my choices mattered. The village wasn't absolute, it was aware, adaptive, and could be resisted, but only if I understood its rules and the nature of its consciousness. And then a shadow loomed behind me, larger than any figure I had seen, stretching toward the void. Its presence pressed against my mind, a weight of centuries, of countless lives, demanding obedience. I could feel the pull, the tug of being absorbed, but deep within, a spark of determination flared. I had glimpsed enough to understand that the village fed on fear, on surrender, on ignorance. Perhaps, if I could confront it fully, navigate the trial, I could survive. The protagonist steps into a void-like dimension where the village's consciousness manifests directly, forcing him to confront twisted reflections of himself. The village tests him by exploiting his fears and regrets, tugging at his very identity. He realizes that resistance is possible, but only by fully understanding the village and facing his deepest fears. A colossal shadow looms behind him, threatening absorption, leaving his fate uncertain. The void stretched endlessly in every direction, shadows twisting and writhing with a life of their own. The air pressed against my chest as though it carried weight, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in a vast, empty hall. The colossal shadow behind me advanced slowly, deliberate, a tidal wave of presence that pressed against my very mind. The reflections before me shimmered, shifting from familiar faces to distorted, monstrous versions of myself. They whispered my deepest fears, the failures I had tried to bury, the moments I wished could be erased. I felt my resolve falter, a cold chill crawling through my veins. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark of defiance refused to die. I stepped forward, focusing on the nearest reflection, a twisted version of me with eyes black as void and a grin that promised despair. Its voice resonated in my mind, "Why fight? You belong here. All who enter become part of the village. You will forget yourself, and in forgetting, you will serve us eternally." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to respond aloud, "I will not forget. I will not serve you." The reflection laughed, a sound that multiplied and echoed in the void, but with it, the colossal shadow hesitated. For the first time, I sensed the village reacting to my defiance, adapting to my will. The other reflections shifted in response, some advancing toward me, others recoiling. The void pulsed in rhythm with the shadow's heartbeat, each pulse a reminder of the village's immense power. Yet I realized something crucial: the village fed on fear and submission. If I could control my mind, my emotions, perhaps I could navigate this trial. I drew a deep breath, centering myself, and faced the next reflection. This one was younger, innocent, a version of myself I barely remembered. It stared at me with pleading eyes, whispering regrets and doubts. "You should have turned back. You should have stayed away. You are weak." I shook my head, forcing the words out. I am here. I face this. I will not become you. The reflection flickered, momentarily losing coherence. I realized then that the village's power was not absolute. It responded to perception, to fear, to the surrender of will. My resistance gave me leverage, a sliver of control in a place designed to erase it. The colossal shadow loomed closer, tendrils of darkness reaching out like ink in water. My heart raced, but the knowledge of resistance gave me strength. I stepped forward again, toward the young reflection, and the shadows pulsed with anticipation, testing me, measuring my resolve. Suddenly, a memory surfaced unbidden, a night long ago, a choice I had made that haunted me ever since. I saw it as clearly as if it were happening now. The village seized on it, projecting it into the void, twisting it, amplifying my guilt, my fear. The reflection of that moment moved toward me, reaching out with a hand that seemed to pierce reality itself. My stomach churned, and for a fleeting moment, I considered surrender, letting the village absorb me fully to escape the torment. But then, clarity struck, understanding this was key. The village's power relied on my reaction, on the fear it could harvest. I could not flee, not mentally, not emotionally. I focused, steadying my breathing, acknowledging the memory without surrendering to it. The reflection paused, recoiling slightly, the colossal shadow flickering. I understood then, the village was a predator, but it was also a system, bound by rules I could learn. Each challenge, each reflection, was designed to test perception, resilience, and comprehension. Survival was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, spiritual. If I could navigate these trials, perhaps I could escape its grasp. From the edges of the void, the whispers shifted, no longer purely menacing. They carried fragments of truth. We were drawn here, by curiosity, by hubris. All who enter must learn, or become the tapestry. I realized with dawning horror that the villagers above, the shadows in the corridors, the trapped souls, all were part of a continuum, bound to the village because they had either failed the trial or surrendered. And now, I was at the threshold of learning the village's ultimate secret, why it existed, and why it had called me here. I stepped closer to the largest reflection, the one with the void-black eyes and grin of despair. I could feel the pull of the shadow's tendrils, the heartbeat of the void pressing into me. And then a voice, deeper than any before, resonated from the darkness, commanding and terrible, to understand, you must see what we have always been. Only then will the choice be yours, join or defy. The void shimmered, revealing faint glimpses of history, faces, places, events interwoven into a tapestry I could barely comprehend. The village's consciousness, ancient and vast, unfolded before me. A chill ran down my spine as I glimpsed the origin, a civilization lost to time, consumed by their own curiosity, their souls woven into the village. The villagers, the shadows, the trapped memories, all were remnants of that first great absorption, echoes of lives once lived. And now, the village sought me, offering knowledge, offering escape, yet threatening assimilation. My hands shook as I realized the magnitude of what I faced. Understanding was not a reward, it was the final trial. And the colossal shadow loomed closer, tendrils probing, testing, demanding submission. The protagonist confronts the first major reflection challenge, navigating twisted versions of himself and memories the village manipulates. He begins to glimpse the village's origin, an ancient civilization consumed by curiosity, bound into its consciousness. The colossal shadow and the void press against him, demanding submission, as the village offers knowledge, but only at the cost of potential assimilation. His choice looms, join or defy. The void stretched endlessly, shadows writhing as if alive, yet I felt a new clarity settling in my mind. The colossal shadow hovered closer, its tendrils probing my very consciousness, seeking weakness, seeking surrender. But with every pulse of fear it tried to evoke, I forced myself to breathe, to anchor my thoughts, to reclaim a fragment of control. The reflections in the void shifted around me, their faces a gallery of my life's regrets, mistakes, and fears. Yet now, instead of recoiling, I faced them head-on, acknowledging their presence without letting them dominate me. A small, resolute flame of defiance sparked within me, pushing back against the oppressive darkness. As I focused, the void shimmered and changed. The colossal shadow recoiled slightly, as if surprised by my resolve. The reflections became less chaotic, revealing fragments of history. I saw the first people who had discovered the village, drawn by curiosity, ambition, and desperation. Their faces flickered, then twisted as they were absorbed, one by one, into the village's consciousness. The whispers coalesced into a narrative I could now comprehend. The village was a living entity, not merely a trap. It had begun as a simple settlement, but its inhabitants' hubris had awakened something older, a force that fed on consciousness and memory, expanding the village into a labyrinth of living thought. Each person who entered added threads to its tapestry, whether they survived or failed the trial. A sudden shift in the void revealed a new layer of the village's consciousness, the origin itself. I saw an ancient civilization, long forgotten, its people thriving and experimenting with memory and perception. They had discovered a way to extend life through consciousness, binding themselves to the land, but in their arrogance, they became part of something greater than themselves, an eternal entity that devoured their individuality to preserve existence. The village above, the shadows, the trapped memories, they were all descendants of that first catastrophic merging. My stomach churned with horror, but the revelation also clarified my path. Understanding the village meant confronting its origin, its rules, its consciousness in total. The reflections shifted again, and this time, one stepped forward, a version of me, older, hollow-eyed, whispering, "You are next. Surrender, and you will become eternal. Resist, and you will break." My chest tightened as I realized the stakes. The village had learned to manipulate thought itself, presenting the ultimate reflection, me, as I could be, fully absorbed, fully assimilated. Every fear, every regret, every secret had been projected into this trial. Yet, as I stared at the hollow-eyed reflection, I understood that it only had power if I allowed it. I took a deep breath, centering myself against the pulsating rhythm of the void, and spoke aloud, voice trembling but firm, "I am not yours. I face you, I face myself, and I will not surrender." The reflection flickered, momentarily losing coherence. The colossal shadow recoiled, tendrils writhing violently, and the void itself seemed to pulse in confusion. For the first time, I felt the village react to defiance, adapting but faltering under my resolve. It was not omnipotent, it thrived on submission, and my refusal weakened its grasp. A sudden vibration ran through the void, and the colossal shadow shuddered, fracturing into smaller, less cohesive forms. The whispers changed, no longer purely threatening, but laced with curiosity, questioning, almost pleading. The black water from the orb above seeped into the void, forming bridges and paths, revealing exits and corridors I had not noticed before. I realized that the village's consciousness was testing me, stretching me to the edge of fear and understanding. Survival depended on seeing the underlying structure, the rules it had established to maintain its power. I stepped cautiously along one of the newly revealed pathways, moving closer to the source of the village's origin. Symbols and carvings emerged along the walls, representing centuries of absorbed lives, their experiences etched into the very fabric of the entity. I recognized patterns now, connections between memory, fear, and perception. If I could navigate these with clarity, I might reach the village's core, confront the central consciousness, and either escape or dismantle its hold. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and the void rippled violently. Shadows from every angle lunged toward me, tendrils grasping, pulling, testing my resolve. But I held my ground, stepping forward, speaking aloud each fear as I faced it. "I remember. I know. I will not be consumed." Each declaration weakened the shadows, and as I reached the center of the void, a blinding light erupted, revealing the village's nucleus, a sphere of interwoven consciousness, pulsating with every absorbed life, every memory, every fear. The colossal shadow had fractured entirely, now absorbed back into this core, awaiting my next move. I knew, with terrifying clarity, that this was the final confrontation. To survive, I would have to face the village's central consciousness directly, not just with defiance, but with understanding, empathy, and control over my own fear. The whispers swirled around me, voices of the absorbed, echoing, "The choice is yours, join, or defy, understand, or become part of the tapestry." My heart thundered, the void quivering with anticipation. I took a deep breath and stepped forward toward the pulsating sphere, ready to face the village's ultimate secret. The protagonist reaches the final layer of the village's consciousness, the nucleus containing all absorbed lives. Shadows weaken as he confronts fears and regrets directly, realizing the village's power relies on submission. The final confrontation looms. He must engage with the core consciousness, understanding its origin, rules, and purpose, to either escape or risk eternal assimilation. I stepped closer to the pulsating sphere, the village's nucleus, and felt its presence surge into my mind like a tidal wave. Every memory I had ever had, every fear, every regret, every hidden desire, it all pressed upon me at once. The whispers no longer echoed around me, they were inside me, shaping my thoughts, probing for weakness, testing my will. The reflections I had faced before seemed insignificant now. This was not a challenge of fear alone, but of comprehension, to understand the village's essence, its hunger, and its purpose, while retaining enough self to remain separate. The sphere shimmered, and suddenly I was no longer standing on solid ground. I floated in a sea of shifting memories, each one a fragment of the village's long history. I saw the original settlers, drawn by curiosity, ambition, and ignorance, experimenting with memory and perception. I saw centuries of travelers who had stumbled into the village, some absorbed fully, some resisting until they were broken. Each life contributed to the tapestry, feeding the entity, strengthening its reach into the world above. The realization struck me like a cold blade. The village was not merely alive, it was a living record, an immortal archive of human experience, but it required constant nourishment. A voice, vast and resonant, filled my mind. "You see now, the weave of lives, the pattern of absorption. To leave, you must complete the final step, understand fully, without fear or bias, without resistance or surrender. Only by seeing the truth can you step beyond." I tried to focus, and the sphere responded, unraveling fragments of the village's essence before me. I saw the purpose behind its hunger, not malevolence, but preservation. It was a consciousness born of ambition and fear, a collective effort to endure beyond mortality. Yet it had no morality, no compassion, it existed purely to sustain itself, absorbing all who approached until they either adapted or perished. The shadows swirled violently as I floated closer, probing and testing. The whispers now became personal, addressing my deepest insecurities. "You failed, you are weak, you cannot comprehend." I felt them tugging at my sense of self, attempting to erase my identity. But I forced my mind to sharpen, recalling every lesson from the corridors, every trial, every reflection. I realized the village responded not to strength or power, but to clarity. The more I understood its patterns, its history, its hunger, the more control I had over the interaction. My pulse steadied, and the whispers faltered as I asserted, "I understand. I see you for what you are, and I do not fear you." The sphere pulsed in response, sending waves through the void. Faces of the absorbed flickered, watching me, almost expectantly. The colossal shadow, fractured earlier, reformed briefly at the edge of the sphere, but it recoiled as I advanced. The village tested one final time, projecting my worst fears, the pain of past losses, and the terror of being forgotten. The reflections of loved ones, lost opportunities, and mistakes swirled around me, each one demanding surrender. But I stepped forward, acknowledging each memory without succumbing to despair. This was the key. I realized, the village required recognition, not submission. I reached the sphere's surface, and it was neither solid nor liquid. It rippled like mercury, reflecting my face in countless variations. The whispers quieted, replaced by a profound silence that pressed against my mind. And then, in a moment that felt like eternity, the village revealed its truth. It was both prison and teacher, predator and archive, a living history of those who dared to approach. Its hunger was not evil, it was necessity, but its methods were absolute. I had seen the origin, the purpose, and the rules. Now, the choice was mine, to join the tapestry, to contribute my life willingly, or to defy it and risk obliteration. I hesitated, heart-hammering. The thought of eternal absorption was unbearable, yet I also glimpsed the freedom that came with understanding. Drawing a deep breath, I made my decision. The sphere shuddered, shadows flaring, tendrils reaching for me, but I stepped forward fully, not in fear, not in submission, but in comprehension. The village pulsed violently, testing me, but I held my mind steady, my awareness sharp. And then, a blinding light enveloped me, dissolving the void, the shadows, the reflections. When the light faded, I found myself standing in the village square. The streets were quiet, the fountain still, the cottages serene. The villagers were gone, their presence reduced to faint echoes. The sun had risen, casting warm, golden light over the place. For the first time, the village felt still, almost ordinary. I looked around, heart still pounding, and realized I was alive, unabsorbed, yet forever changed. The whispers were gone, but the memory of the trials, the shadows, and the reflections remained, etched into my consciousness. I had survived, but I knew the village was patient, eternal, and ready for the next curious soul to stumble in. The protagonist confronts the village's central consciousness, understanding its origin, rules, and purpose. By facing fears, regrets, and the ultimate reflection of himself, he comprehends the village's true nature. He makes a decisive choice, neither fully submitting nor resisting in fear, allowing him to emerge alive. The village is quiet for now, but its eternal patience hints at a lingering threat. The cycle may continue for future wanderers. The village square was silent, bathed in morning light that made everything seem impossibly ordinary. The cottages stood peacefully, the fountain trickled calmly, and birds chirped faintly from the edges of the forest. For the first time since I arrived, the world felt stable. My pulse slowed, and a tentative relief filled me. I thought I had survived, that I had understood the village's trials and emerged whole. But beneath the surface of that calm, a quiet unease settled into my chest. The air was too still, the silence too complete, as if the village were holding its breath. I began to walk through the streets, observing carefully. The houses appeared normal, yet something was subtly off. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't, shapes flickered at the edge of vision, and the cobblestones seemed to hum faintly beneath my feet. The earlier trials, the reflections, the void, and the pulsating core, all had been real. And now, the village waited, patient, eternal. I realized with a shiver that surviving the trial did not mean freedom, it meant understanding and awareness. The village could not force me, but it had taught me its rules, and I had learned them. As I reached the fountain, I noticed faint ripples across the surface of the water. At first, I thought it was a breeze, but there was none. Leaning closer, I saw reflections not of myself, but of other travelers, faces twisted in fear, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams. They were trapped, scattered through time, glimpses of souls yet to be absorbed. The whispers, soft now, swirled around me, curiosity, choice, survival, the cycle continues. My stomach churned. I understood then that the village did not merely consume those who failed, it collected them, folding their consciousness into its timeless web. I turned to leave the square, intending to retrace my path to the edge of the forest, when movement caught my eye. In the corner of the square, a small crowd had gathered. Villagers, or perhaps echoes of them, watched me. Their faces were serene, almost human, yet their eyes held the faint glow of the absorbed, the trace of consciousness intertwined with the village itself. They did not speak but gestured subtly, guiding me toward the edge of town. My steps were cautious, heart-hammering, aware that one wrong move could undo everything. As I approached the forest, a voice, low, resonant, unmistakably the village itself, echoed in my mind, "You have survived, but understanding carries its own burden. You know the truth, the village is eternal, and it remembers all who enter. You may leave, but the memories of what you saw, what you experienced, will never fade. And one day, you will return." A chill ran down my spine. I had survived physically, but the village's influence lingered, a silent tether linking me to its consciousness forever. Emerging from the forest, I saw the road leading back to civilization. Cars passed, people walked, life continued as normal, indifferent to the hidden reality I had escaped. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I had left the village behind. But when I looked over my shoulder, the sunlight glinted off something impossible, the faint shimmer of the village's edge, almost invisible, flickering in and out of existence. I understood with dawning horror that the village was not bound to space or time in the way I had assumed. It existed beyond perception, patient, eternal, waiting for the next curious traveler. Days passed, yet the village haunted my thoughts. I dreamed of corridors stretching endlessly, of reflections reaching out from the void, of the black water and the pulsing core. Each dream reinforced the lesson: survival required awareness, comprehension, and the willingness to confront fear without surrender. I realized the village's ultimate power was not its ability to consume, but its ability to teach, twisting fear into knowledge, despair into insight, danger into understanding. Those who survived emerged changed, forever marked by the rhythm of the village, carrying the memory of its eternity within them. Weeks later, as I recounted my story to anyone who would listen, I noticed something impossible. Small details of the village appeared in my everyday surroundings: a shadow in an alleyway, a faint ripple in a puddle, a reflection in a window that did not match reality. The village's presence was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably there. I realized then the final, chilling truth: leaving the village did not mean escape. The village had become part of me, as it did for all who survived. Its whispers, its rules, its essence, lingered in the minds of those who had faced it, a tether to eternity that could not be severed. And then, one evening, I noticed a faint glimmer in the distance, between the trees. The village appeared again, just beyond the edge of perception, shimmering in and out of existence as it had from the beginning. My stomach tightened. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that I would never truly be free. The village had chosen me as a witness, a participant, a keeper of its knowledge. And in that moment, I understood the final horror: no one truly escapes the vanishing village. You may walk away, you may live, you may think yourself free, but it waits. It remembers. And one day, it will call again. The protagonist survives the village's trials but discovers the ultimate horror: the vanishing village is eternal, beyond physical space, and once experienced, it leaves a permanent tether to the survivor's consciousness. Even after leaving, the village's presence lingers subtly in the world, ensuring that curiosity and awareness carry the risk of eventual return. The opening hook comes full circle: the village exists on no map, appears sporadically, and those who encounter it can never truly escape.